Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to have something a little different now. A gal that I've just met recently, Mary Burkhart, who is the founder of Religion in Remission, and she also is one of the sponsors this year for CORT 2022. And Mary gets the honor of introducing our next speaker. Take it away, Mary.
Thank you, Janice. So this morning, Mandisa Thomas, she's the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated. And although she was never formally indoctrinated into belief, she was heavily exposed to Christianity, Islam, and Black nationalism. Mandisa has been an inspiration to me personally for years, and I recently had the opportunity to connect with her directly. She is an amazing person, and I'm actually a part of Black Nonbelievers myself. And I can tell you honestly that it is an amazing organization and it's something wonderful to be a part of. So when I was asked who I wanted to introduce, there was no hesitation or question that it was this amazing woman who works so hard for our community. Today, she will be discussing the very timely and necessary topic of strange bedfellows, how the church and politics have perpetuated racism. Welcome, Mandisa.
Thank you very much, Mary. It is a pleasure to see you here. And I really appreciate your sponsorship for this event. It is very much needed, this forum, and I appreciate being invited. Thank you, Janice, for coordinating this conference, and thank you to everyone who's working behind the scenes on it. As was said, I am Mandisa Thomas, for those of you who don't know, and I am the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated, which is headquartered in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And today, I thought it was when I was asked about what I could present on, and the topic I chose was, how racism in politics and the church, because it is a very necessary conversation. And in order to get some better understanding, it is a part of why when we focus on religious trauma and trying to overcome it, these institutional factors are necessary to discuss. And when it comes to certain demographics, it's important to understand why there could be more issues and more challenges, as to overcoming religious trauma, particularly as it pertains to Black communities and other people of color. So I really wanted to discuss how this has an impact on the work we do and on our society in general. So I will be sharing my screen now because for those of you who know, I do like to give my presentations with some visuals. And so the title of my talk is called Strange Bedfellows, How the Church and Politics Have Perpetuated Racism. And okay. So a bit more about me for those of you who weren't aware. I am a founder and president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated. I was born and raised in New York City, which is where I am currently located for the moment. I am visiting, my family and I were cleaning out my father's belongings. He recently passed away in February. And I have to give some, pay some tribute to my father, who ultimately was raised in the church. He didn't like it and was pretty much a non-believer during the course of his life. So that was an influence on me to a certain extent. And it was an honor to be able to memorialize him without any religious influence whatsoever. I did have a pretty secular upbringing. I was raised in the Black nationalist or Black conscious community, where I learned a lot about Black history and culture, and also learned about institutional racism and also injustices that were committed against Black and other marginalized communities. So my presentation will come with this lens here. And so I just want everyone to be prepared for that. I transitioned to full-time activism in 2018. So I am 4 years in as a full lifetime activist running Black Nonbelievers. And there is a way you can further support my activism through Patreon. There is a link there. You can subscribe for as little as $1 per month to help support my activism. In addition to running Black Nonbelievers, I also currently serve on the boards for American Atheists and the American Humanist Association, as well as another organization called Humanist Global Charity that is headed up by Phil Zuckerman, if you aren't familiar. So over the years, I have been fortunate to have received a few awards and recognition, the one of which is the Secular Student Alliance's Backbone Award in 2019, as well as that same year receiving the Free Thought Heroine Award from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I was also the Unitarian Universalist Humanist Association's Person of the Year in 2018. I was also the co-recipient of the 2020 Harvard Humanist of the Year, along with Sikivu Hutchinson and Ijoma Aluo. And most recently, I received that should be 2022, Irving and Annabelle Wilson Award, which is presented by the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester, Massachusetts. We were supposed to do the award in 2020. However, it was pushed to 2022, of course, due to the pandemic. And I really do appreciate the honors there. And I am also a certified humanist celebrant, which means I can perform weddings, funerals, and other life ceremonies. So if you are interested in ever having me perform a ceremony for you, I am happy to be among the community of humanist celebrants. So please do keep that in mind. And I always say that I did not get involved in this community for awards and recognition. However, it is nice when it comes. So I appreciate it. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that talk 2 weeks ago, if I didn't give a bit of background there. So for those of you who might have been under a bit of a rock, I recently presented at the 2022 American Atheist Convention. That took place in Atlanta, which is where I am based and where Black Nonbelievers is based. And the topic of my talk was how to address white supremacy in the secular community and what to do about it. And the talk was not live streamed, so you had to be there in person to see it in its entirety. Now, American Atheists, as well as the American Humanist Association, posted some highlights from the talk. And the tweet that American Atheists posted included this now, what is considered controversial slide, which shows 10 ways that we as a secular community, not just white people, everyone, may be upholding white supremacy. And so there were these 10 points that were tweeted out, and it caused a bit of a firestorm from people who were objecting and also making very egregious and erroneous statements about what was implied in this talk. And I will say that it is important for me as an organizer and as a leader in this movement for the past 11 years to say that, for one, I'm not saying anything new. This isn't something that hasn't been brought up before. However, and I have seen a lot of growth in this community, which I think is important. However, there are still some very, very, crucial things that I'm seeing that can still be improved upon. And that was the main point of the talk. It is unfortunate that there were some individuals who chose to go on the defense and also on the attack about this presentation. And I'm looking forward to when it is released, when the video is released, which will very much refute what some of the folks were saying online. And I just think that it is important for us to have this discussion about, once again, how we are treating each other, and also acknowledging that there are some folks who are going to fight back against it. But we continue to move forward as a community. And I appreciate everyone who was supportive of myself and Black nonbelievers as an organization during these past 2 weeks, because that was just that was a little crazy. But this is definitely still a subject that is worth revisiting. And of course, we have our challenges with these institutional issues, but I think as a community, we can absolutely overcome them. So getting into that is related to white supremacy. And as this is a talk about racism and it's, in the institutional way, it's important to understand the definitions of racism, which the first one is belief that race is a fundamental determinant of traits, capacities, and that racial differences, are, what it is. I'm sorry, I can't see everybody there, but also it's also the systemic oppression of racial groups. Now, does this mean that, there are people of color who can be racist based on the first definition? However, it does take on another meaning when we are talking about certain races who have used that in order to systemically oppress others. And white supremacy is certainly a symptom of racism and and those institutional factors. So the talk I gave 2 weeks ago wasn't even simply about racism. It was focused directly on white supremacy, but in the context of this talk, it's good to at least have those definitions so that we can better understand what it is that we're discussing here. And of course, we have to talk about Christianity and its role in racism. And the reason why I chose the topic strange bedfellows is because there is a saying that, politics does make strange bedfellows. It really does, because there are so many things, especially about the United States, that aren't supposed to be mixed in. And we see that when it comes to religion and politics, as well as the government and how these and how these principles are sort of interwoven into laws, even though they're not supposed to be. So when we talk about Christianity and its role in racism, of course, we have to we have to point out that Christianity was used, and there were passages in the Bible that were used to justify the enslavement and subjugation of Blacks and the African captives who were trafficked and transported over to the United States and the Caribbean. So that is very, very important to understand. So, and also during that time period of like the 17th century, there were laws that were written on the books about being a Christian, especially in the state of Virginia. And it's important to understand and to know that Black folks were kept out of white churches in the 17th century, which basically led to the formation of the Black church collective, which includes Black churches and denominations. And also Blacks were also kept out of the voting process during the Jim Crow era. Many Black folks were. And there were a lot of politicians who ran on these Christian platforms that were also racist platforms that encouraged segregation. And while many northern white churches were anti-slavery, they were also very much against interracial relationships, which is why separate churches were encouraged and also separate denominations. So we look at these Christian principles and how they have perpetuated, again, the subjugation, and also definitely not separate and equal. They were separate and unequal. And with the influence of Christianity on these laws and on these practices, you really begin to see how racism really reared its ugly head, especially during that time period. So let's talk about politics and the Black church. Because there had to be a Black church collective formed due to these racist practices, there are a lot of Black folks who feel like, it is important that, that politics and the church are important to their everyday life. It is integral. And because for the longest time, Black churches were often the only place to receive political information as well as support for communities. So you really couldn't do much without that church support. It became very, very powerful in the 18th and 19th centuries. Black churches were also used for strategic planning and organizing during the Civil Rights era. It wasn't always safe, as we know, with the bombing in Birmingham in 1963, which took place shortly after the March on Washington, where the four young ladies were tragically killed in that bombing of the church. But for overall, Black churches were used as strategic grounds during the civil rights movement. And it is important to note that there were many Black churches who were very reluctant to get involved with the civil rights movement, for one, because it was very, very dangerous to do. So that is very, very important for people to know and to understand that nuance and and understanding more in detail. And so because religion and the church is still so instrumental in Black communities, politicians, Black, white, and otherwise, and elected officials often go after them, i.e. us, as a voting pool. And the information about Black Americans being more likely than the larger U.S. public to say that it is important for sermons to touch on political topics can be found on Pew Research in their study that was released in 2021 about religion and Black life. Also, but where we have to talk about where this becomes a problem, because in many Black communities, state-church separation lines are heavily blurred. We still have a state-church separation problem when it comes to many jurisdictions, many cities, many states, and many countries. And there are organizations that fight against that. But when you see Black communities, it's damn near inseparable. Almost every politician is touting their love for God, and it's just saturated with religious language, and especially when it comes to politics, as well as the issues that impact Black communities in particular. Also, in many Christian values harm the well-being of Black communities, especially when it comes to reproductive health and justice. There are far too many Black pastors and also Black Christians that are still very, they still hold very anti-LGBTQ values, and also they are very conservative when it comes to reproductive health and justice. They are still very much opposed to abortion, which when it comes to the health of the Black community, and where Black women have higher mortality rates when it comes to childbirth and other factors, oftentimes you still see many denominations that are very, very conservative and in their quote unquote Christian values. And so it is very much antithetical to the overall health of the Black community when it comes to being a Christian. And while many Blacks do tend to vote progressive, far too many still follow their pastor's leads, which can result in voting against our own interests. And yes, Sundays are still the most segregated day of the week. While we have seen the rise of many interdenominational or interracial churches, there is still very much a mistrust of white churches, and especially as we've seen Christian nationalism and this evangelicalism that is very much rooted in racism. And there are still many Black folks who don't think that, and they don't think that overall predominantly white churches focus on social justice issues and issues that pertain directly to Black folks and other marginalized communities. And so, yes, Sundays are still the most segregated day of the week, where you will find most of your people in either whichever church they feel comfortable with. but also the ones that they identify with the most. And this is still very reflective of what it looked like a few centuries ago. In order to understand some better context of how politics and the church have also impacted laws in this country, we have to look to Woodrow Wilson, who was the 28th president of the United States, lived from 1856 to 1924, who was very much a product of racist practices. His family, he was very much an apologist for slavery and a proponent of racial segregation. He was actually, though, elected president with the help of the Black community. There were Black leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois who actually did endorse Wilson for president based on his campaign promises to help Black communities. However, when he was elected president and got into office, he established some of the most racist policies that further disfranchised Black folks. There were cabinet positions that were put in place, and he appointed white folks to those, effectively shutting out many Black folks in the government. And also he endorsed the movie Birth of a Nation that was released in 1915. And that picture is a quote from Woodrow Wilson that was used in that movie. And that movie was also the impetus for the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, as well as it incited the lynchings of many Black folks during the early 1900s. And we see this in the imagery of that movie. I have never seen it in its entirety, and I'm glad I didn't. But when you see how the Black folks are portrayed in that movie, and to see the President of the United States endorse such a movie and also engage in racist practices, and this is less than we're talking about 100 years ago, and it took a while for these racist practices and policies to be overcome. So when people talk about things like critical race theory and why is this so important, this is part of the reason why, because it wasn't not too long ago in history that this was taking place. And so now we look at current modern history, and the 44th president or the 45th president of the United States, and look at all of these religious leaders surrounding him and endorsing his presidency. But also we can look to the other side to see that history hasn't changed that much when it comes to blend or melding in religion and politics, and how it perpetuates this system of supremacy, and as well as using marginalized communities to effectively perpetuate racism to a large extent. And it's almost like the Black voting pool is like shooting, sitting ducks in many ways. And many politicians have tried it. But when you look at the contrast here and who is considered to be right, we see that history hasn't changed that much. So is there hope for the future? Perhaps. We are looking at a picture of now Senator Raphael Warnock, who is the Democratic senator out of the state of Georgia. He was one of the senators that helped turn Georgia blue in the 2020 elections. The other was Jon Ossoff, and that was with the help of Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor in, 2018? No, 2019, when she ran for governor. And of course, that was a very controversial race. But of course, we still see Reverend being used prominently for Senator Warnock. Even on his website, he goes, because unfortunately that Reverend piece still holds a lot of weight, even though he seems to be very progressive. The fact that he still is touting that reverend, it can be a bit of a sore spot, but we are hopeful that that isn't the thing that he is resting his laurels on in order to get elected, because this could be seen as violating state church separation. But at the same time, it's like, also, do we really want to put forward that this is this is what the Black community looks like? Is it further perpetuating the historical factors? But we're hopeful that this will be overturned in the near future. So what is it that we can do as a secular community to better understand this history and move forward as a community, and as we look at politics, and as well as the church and how they have supported and perpetuated racist practices? It is good to understand that institutional racism and white supremacy does affect us, whether we realize it or not. And there has been a history of non-Black or non-POC humanists who have perpetuated white supremacist ideals. And this is partially based on the notion that Black folks maybe can never come to non-belief or secularism. But, and this is what we have to better understand about this affecting our communities as well, especially as many of us still deconstruct religion, and again, the trauma that comes from it. Also, it's good to be aware of dismissing the voices of Black, Indigenous, and other POC folks, and check any privilege that you may have. It may be easy to be dismissive of why there are still so many religious folks in marginalized communities, especially communities of color. It is good to understand how, again, these issues impact us, and also how other social justice issues impact us as a whole, and why this may be more challenging for many of us. Do support the organizations like the Secular Coalition for America, the Freedom for Religion Foundation, and the Center for the Free Thought Equality, which does encourage non-religious candidates and brings awareness to the fact that state and church should be separate, keeping religion out of government, as well as bringing awareness to the fact that to many communities who are so used to having the influence of the church that they think it's okay to tout this even in politics and other areas, and it really is not. And just take as much action as you possibly can. We can't save the world. It's not that we should try, but we do what we can when it comes to the public arena and getting involved with however you get involved with the political process, and to try to and make yourselves as visible as possible, but being understanding and compassionate of what other people go through. So that is very, very important. And these are some visuals. These are some pictures that I wanted to include, because it is important that we acknowledge that these things do impact our communities, whether we realize them or not. Continue to educate yourself, continue to support, donate, convert, have the conversations. And also, if you can, spend your privilege, do what you can to support the organizations that are doing this direct action work. And it will not resolve itself. I think one of the most important aspects of our communities is that once we leave religion and the God concept behind, we are able to understand how these things intersect, especially for people of color, women, LGBTQ+, and also how racism plays a huge role in this as well. And we should, as much as possible, be on the lookout for when these politicians, they shouldn't be able to get away with this stuff anymore. Not at all. So just being mindful of all of that. So here's some recommended reading and viewing. The first one It is over a century old now, but almost a century old, but I highly recommend giving it a read. And it is The Miseducation of the Negro by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who is the founder of Negro History Week. It really does talk about a number of things that impact Black communities, but also how, also how the church and politics does perpetuate respectability. It does perpetuate this sense of, separation, segregation, and racism to a large extent, and how many Black folks fall victim to that. Also, another one is Humanists in the Hood by Sikivu Hutchinson, and Holy Hierarchy, The Religious Roots of Racism in America by Jeremiah Kamara, which is available on Amazon Prime. So I'm watching my time here. And I would also encourage you to follow and subscribe to Black Nonbelievers on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where we launched a new show this year called In the Cut. It aired on New Year's Day, and we have special guests that are featured. So we encourage you to subscribe to us on social media. And of course, we encourage you to donate and support the work of Black Nonbelievers directly at our website, and also every place that you see here. Finally, I would like to share information about our upcoming events. We will be doing the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference again this year from September 30th to October 2nd, where you can hear more from other women of color. And it's come one, come all. We will have an online streaming option available for the conference. So visit the website at wocbeyondbelief.com. We do have student rates available. We have sponsorship opportunities. And it is a joint production of Black Nonbelievers, the Black Skeptics Group, and the Women's Leadership Project. And also, we will be embarking on BNCCon 2022 from November 26th through December 3rd aboard the Carnival Spirit. And we have a number of speakers there as well. And there is still time to sign up. You can find all of this information at our website at blacknonbelievers.org if you are interested in hearing more perspectives from women of color, people of color, how that impacts our everyday lives, as well as how we are represented politically and also other areas of the public sphere. So thank you all very much again for having me. I hope this presentation was informative and insightful and helpful to you all. And so now we have time for questions.
Wow, this was great, Mandisa. So educational and informative. Thank you very much. I do also want to remind folks that you will be joining us at the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture online conference in October.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to it.
So I'm just waiting for questions to come in. People definitely are still processing and digesting the information that you gave us. So I'm pleased to know that you'll be doing your cruise again now that hopefully things are waning with the virus, so people can get back to regular life.
Absolutely. And we did the cruise last year and everything went very, very well. The cruise lines are very, very big on the safety aspect, especially with being in in an enclosed space. So that actually went very, very well. And we're looking forward to it being even better this year.
And where will you guys be traveling?
We will be sailing out of Miami, Florida again. This year we are going to Honduras, Belize, and Cozumel. Yeah.
That is going to be quite a trip. I see that a question has come in. How do you recommend we address opponents of CRT being taught in schools? Often these people have little to no understanding of what CRT actually is. Yes, please explain that a little bit also for our Canadian viewers.
Yes. So CRT, which is critical race theory, is actually courses that were taught on the collegiate level. And the most important aspect is understanding how institutional racism has had an impact in public policy, in laws and legislation. And we see this when it comes to Blacks who were denied the right to vote, as well as other very, very racist practices like redlining. We have to understand, for people who don't know about the GI Bill that was introduced during, I think it was World War I, there were many Blacks who were denied access to the GI Bill. Former Black soldiers for a while were denied that. And so this is a part of a curriculum that teaches how racist practices were put into law, and which also impacts public perception. It also impacts how you view people of color, especially Black folks, and how this still has an impact on how we are treated even today. And so there are many opponents of this type of this education and this information, because they feel like it's, they're saying it's racism. They're saying that it's an attack on white people, that it's inflammatory. And I mean, when you think about, the education and information itself, it is very, very touching. It's very sensitive, and it could possibly make you very upset. But what I would suggest be done for people that you're trying to at least inform on critical race theory and their objections to it. Many people don't even know what it means, so it's good to at least start with the background, and because they're hearing what they see. These politicians, they're seeing what is being said in the media, and by, of course, people who are opposing it, without looking at it for themselves. And I think I always think that it's a good idea to try to make it relatable to a situation or to someone, because I think that's how most people understand it. Put yourself in the shoes of having to learn about why there was a first Black person to do whatever, because of the fact that there were these laws put in place. The first women to have to, because there were laws and policies put into place that forbid them. So I think it's always a good method to try to make it relatable in some way to how it would impact you. And people seem to get it better that way, but also using the information. There are some people who just simply don't know what it is. They're just used to hearing, the opposition to it, that they have not done any research of their own.
Yes. One book that was actually quite helpful for me was by Resmaa Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands. Mm-hmm. And he also has just an excellent course online for people who are not members of the BIPOC community to learn potentially about their own views and how they influence our interactions, the way we go through this world. Okay, someone has asked, are you seeing a lot of Black male atheists?
Sure, yeah, there are a lot of now. There was at one point in time in this community where the Black male atheist voices were more dominant. We are now seeing that balanced a bit, and I think that part of that is due to the number of women who have started speaking up and who are now in leadership, which has been very important. I mean, our communities are very much dominated by male voices. Mm-hmm. And so while we can acknowledge that, and while we can appreciate that. Certainly, we must be careful as a community about, giving into patriarchy. And part of white supremacist, ideals is this idea that male voices are still more, and unfortunately, we tend to perpetuate that at times, and we got to be careful. But yes, there are now more, there are more Black folks who are, out and open, and that includes a lot of males as well. But yeah, at one point there were more openly identified males than women, and we're now starting to see that change.
Okay. Another question: do you think the support Black churches have provided for safe community building and political organizing in the past, such as during the civil rights movement, is the reason it's hard for some people to transition to a secular political view?
I don't think that in itself is a barrier to that, but there is a tendency to hold on to that tradition and holding the churches up to that standard, which means that it's harder for more people to kind of see or to kind of get to a place where there are more non-religious folks, because there is still very much a dependence on that. I don't think that it helps with, I don't think that as far as coming to a secular perspective, if that was the question, I don't think that would be the exact reason, because of the churches, strategizing and providing community support. But what it does, where that becomes a challenge, is when people leave the church, and when it comes to, coming into the community and being a non-believer, the visibility can be harder. That I think that can definitely be a barrier there when it comes to, once you get there, and holding on to the church as being one of the only places, or perceived to be one of the only places, that you can gain political clout or visibility. That definitely becomes a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then of course on a personal level, when we've grown up in a very religious home as well, it's hard for us to sometimes leave religion or divorce religion, because we know that it's going to have a real impact, a significant impact on those relationships with our parents, particularly. The relationship just changes when they realize that we no longer believe these things that were so important, that are so important to them. So that just adds an extra layer of challenge to everything. Someone has commented, "We should not focus on it because it is upsetting," is a very don't look up mentality. I don't know if you watched that movie called Don't Look Up. I
did, yes.
Yeah, and yeah, I think they're right on the money there. People don't like feeling uncomfortable.
Right.
They just don't. They'll do anything to avoid it, in fact.
Right. But as a community, we have to be comfortable with getting uncomfortable. Yes. And we don't break these barriers or institutions down overnight by ignoring it. And it is unfortunate that, we do see people like that. But
Wow. Yeah, this has just been tremendously informative and educational. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you again in October when you speak at Shameless Sexuality. I hope people really jump on board supporting you and all your endeavors that you're involved in. It's just a real treat to have you with us here at the Conference on Religious Trauma. Thank you.
Thank you once again for having me.
Okay. All right, folks. Wow, the time is just flying by. We're about to take a 15-minute break. And when we resume, we have David Teachout on deck. And I just appreciate his work so much as a colleague. I know you won't want to miss him. So take a look in the exhibit hall, and we'll see you here again in just a few minutes.